Good evening. How's everybody doing? I want to start off by telling you that I appreciate you taking the time to come out this evening. It's an exceptionally busy time of year, and for you to take the time to be here is really a testament to what makes Midway such a strong district, and that's the commitment of our parents and our students, and how hard you work at being informed and knowing what's going on. I am Chris Allen. I'm the superintendent of schools here, and I'm going to visit with you for just a few minutes about some adjustments we're making to the configuration of the middle school schedule. I wanted to have an opportunity to visit with you tonight, not because these changes are so overwhelmingly sweeping, but really just in the name of sharing some information. The other thing I want to make sure that you know is if you have friends who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't, we are videoing this. That's why I'm using this mic, despite the fact I could probably be loud enough to not use it. And we'll be releasing out a video that shares this exact same information. So if they couldn't make it, just tell them to continue to monitor the district's communications, and we'll be sharing all this information electronically prior to the time that students start course selection for the 26-27 school year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Why are we having the conversation we're having tonight? And it's really the intersection of three things. And one is we continue to struggle with our maintenance and operation budget. This is not a budget presentation, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but what I need to understand is we really operate with two buckets of money. There's the INS bucket, which is the money we use to maintain our facilities. We just passed a bond program to put money into that bucket that we can use to make our schools better. And then we have a maintenance and operations budget, and that's the bucket that we pay for day in and day out expenses. And so if you'll think about things like teacher salaries, electrical bills, property and casualty insurance, the fuel we run for buses, that's what we use that money for. And it's illegal to use INS money for M&O purposes. Sometimes people wonder, well, if you passed a bond to build this building, why can't you just use that money to pay teachers instead? And it's because it's illegal to do so. And so really all we're talking about when I talk about that $3.5 million budget deficit is the M&O bucket only. And that's kind of what keeps the district running day over day. That $3.5 million budget deficit would carry forward into next year if we don't do something about it. And it would actually grow because we're going to have to do something to address compensation for our staff. And it will continue to grow unless we make some structural changes to our budget that allow us to try and pull our finances back in line with our revenues. It's no different than if you think about your home budget. If you have a certain amount of money and you're running your home budget on it, and then there's a job loss or something happens and the amount of money you have to come in reduces, then you have to start to make changes to bring your budget into alignment so that you're not constantly overspending. The good news is that we've come up with some ways to think about that we think are pretty creative and going to have minimal impact on students. Changes in state law. So one of the things that happened in House Bill 2 is they're going to start restricting our ability to hire non-certified teachers in key areas. The district has something we call District of Innovation. This is kind of a technical thing, but it allows us to hire folks who are not certified and put them in certain instructional classrooms while they work on getting certified. The state has changed the laws and they're phasing aspects of that out. What that means is every teacher I have who has a certification to teach certain key subjects, think math and reading, I need them teaching those subjects and not teaching in electives such as like a Panther Pathways or some other elective. So we've got to be able to find a way to make sure that the teaching staff we have is actually teaching in the classes that are the most critical to student success, okay? And then the last thing is better for students. And I will tell you, and I want to be very transparent about this on the front end. We started looking at this because we had a budget problem. And then HB2 came out with the session, and that created some more things that we needed to figure out. But in the process of looking at this, we saw some opportunities to actually give kids maybe an increased quality of life in middle school compared to what they have right now. And so that's why we're having the conversation, and that's why we're discussing what I'm discussing with you tonight. So, reconfiguration of middle school schedules. This is a sample of what a 7-period day for middle school might look like next year. This is not the schedule, y'all, but this is what it might look like. And what I would point out is that this is 7 periods and then you have an advisory. So we kind of feel like 8 periods to the kids, but it's 7 academic periods and an advisory. Each one of these academic classes is extended by 6 minutes compared to right now. More instructional time means more learning, and 6 minutes may not seem like very much, but if you stretch that out over 170 school days, you're somewhere in the neighborhood of a little bit less than 20 hours of additional instructional time. So one of the things this shift does is it gives kids more time on instruction. It extends advisory just a little bit, and we needed to do that, and I'll explain why we need to do that more in just a moment. But you can see those 51-minute periods gives our kids more time on instruction, and allows them to continue to have a full schedule for their middle school experience. Here's a potential student schedule for 6th grade. This is not what every 6th grade schedule would look like, but this is a hypothetical. What I want to point out for you is that even in the midst of making these changes, a 6th grader would still have 3 elective options. So it doesn't reduce the number of electives that they have at all. The only way that that becomes a challenge is if you have a student that has a specific intervention that's required. So like, for example, you might have a student who's behind a couple grade levels academically and we need to put them in an intervention class. Or they may receive a specific educational service, like when you see it says elective/education service. They might be legally required to be scheduled into like a dyslexia class if they struggle with reading. But for many, if not most of our students, they would still have the 3 elective option in front of them, in addition to their core instruction as well as advisory. Okay? The shift that you're going to notice is that our students would lose 1 elective in 7th grade. And I'll explain to you why here in just a minute. These parts kind of have to fit together. And what we'd be putting in place of that is a professional communications lifetime wellness course. We need to do that because the state requires us to provide certain instruction to kids in middle school. And we're not legally allowed to not provide that instruction. It includes things like health and human sexuality, digital citizenship, how to interact with law enforcement. They have all these things that we're required to cover. And we can cover all of those state required pieces and give our kids the professional communications and lifetime wellness course, and it would all count as a high school credit. So though they'd be losing an elective as a 7th grader, they're actually picking up an elective when they get to high school. So they're really kind of swapping a high school from middle school. Because this is a class they won't have to take in high school. Right now, many of our kids take this class in high school. And so this is kind of a swap. Are y'all tracking with me? Okay. And then a potential 8th grade schedule, 3 electives. It looks very much like 6th grade. You see the 4 cores, 3 electives, and an advisory. All right. We thought it was important to maintain those 3 electives in 8th grade because that's where many, many kids get their boost going into high school. We wanted them to be able to have all the experiences in 6th grade and kind of see what that looks like. They're going to have to narrow their focus a little bit in 7th, and then when we get to 8th, they open that back up, and they can be completely in the loop. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say that you have a student who's really interested in theater. Well, if they're pinched on electives in 8th grade, they may or may not get word that they do tryouts for certain theatrical productions for freshmen in the spring of their 8th grade year. So if your kid's passionate about theater, we want them in that elective as an 8th grader so they make sure they're in the loop about things that are going on as they transition to high school. Same is true for band and other programs, okay? So they maintain those electives at the high school, those 3 electives at the 8th grade level. You might be asking yourself, how can we go down a period and still maintain 3 electives? And it's because while we're reducing the number of periods the kids would take, we're also reducing our locally required electives. We had some classes that we were requiring students to take that we're no longer going to require them to take so that they can maintain their elective options. All right? And you may be asking yourself, well, how are you going to, so then what are you going to do about the things they used to take in those classes? That's why we have to extend that advisory by about 6 minutes. So there are things like 4-year plans, college and career planning, academic advisement, and Leader and Me that we were doing in other ways that we're now going to put into a slightly extended advisory. That's where we also deal with student academic needs. So if we have a student who's not, let's say they're not 2 or 3 grade levels behind, but just a little bit behind, and they need some tutorials, and they need to get that during the school day, they would do that during this advisory period. On the flip side, let's say that you have a student who's very, very high achieving and needs extra enrichment, like they're making straight A's and everything, and maybe school's not as challenging as you wish it was. They would also have opportunities to get some additional academic work that would be enriching, kind of project-based stuff. I was talking to a person who's leading up the advisory thing today. And we are right now kind of building out what that will look like. But by shifting around that time a little bit and creating some additional space in advisory, we're able to pull back on the local requirements, open up those electives, and reduce the number of courses in a day that a student would be required to take so that they still have options and we're not compromising their academic achievement. Are y'all with me so far? Okay. So what are the pros? Why would someone suggest this is a good idea, or why would I say I think in some ways this may be better for students? It is flexible for more meaningful intervention to address specific student needs. We're going to completely redesign that advisory time in a way that we think is going to be much more pinpointed on what an individual student needs. I hear from middle school students from time to time, y'all, that they're a little frustrated with advisory because they don't really feel like they do much with it, okay? And what we want to do is reimagine that so we make that time more useful for all learners, no matter what their academic ability is or what they're doing with their academic progress at the time. We believe it will help our student mental health. Leaving a fifth grade where you switch, like you have a lot of our fifth grade students, they have an English, social studies teacher and a math science teacher. So basically they have two teachers. To come up here and having potentially 9, this reduces that a little bit and gives those kids less that they have to keep up with as they make that big transition from 5th to 6th grade. We have some reason to be a little concerned about this. When we look at our academic data, we see a dip in achievement between 5th and 6th grade. That's not completely unusual. We kind of see that trend across the state. Some of that's because there's a pretty big jump in academic rigor, but some of that's because it's just such a big cultural shift to go from being in an elementary school, about 600 kids and 2 teachers, to a middle school with 1,000 kids and 8 or 9 different touch points. That's a lot to manage. And so we think this pulls back on that a little bit. All students would earn at least 1 high school credit, at least 1, and I'll talk more about why that is at least 1 in a minute. But it would count in all programs of study and all endorsements. So no matter what your student kind of picks as a path of study going into high school, that high school credit they would earn in that professional communication / lifetime bonus, it works in all of those. They'd be able to reach advanced CTE coursework in the 11th grade instead of 12. That helps some of our students who are interested in like getting in the work program or who want to be involved in internships. We have some of our advanced CTE courses that are double blocked. And if you have a student who's a 5th grader coming into 6th, or you have a current middle school student, that may seem like a long way off, but it's really not too early to be thinking about those types of things now, especially in our courses that lead to industry-based certifications. We have a number of high school students who graduate with a certification that allows them to walk out and they're immediately employable. And so this would give more kids opportunities to get to that level sooner, while potentially even protecting a release period so that as they get older, they can have more flexibility in their schedules. It opens up an additional elective at the high school. Because they're getting that professional communications / lifetime bonus done in 7th grade, it opens up a slot in high school where they may need it. When I say professional communications, y'all, when I was in high school, we called that class speech, in case that wasn't obvious to you. Okay, so if you're wondering what that is, it's the old speech class. They can take that speech and wellness class without it hurting their GPA. Again, this may not mean a lot to you, but as you hit high school, GPA is all the talk, okay? And so it gives our students a taste of some of that high school work, and it allows them to get a look at that without having any impact on the GPA, because grades earned at the middle school level are not calculated into the GPA. So what are the cons, or what are the things that one might be, continued gains? Help with teacher fatigue. Our teachers in middle school teach an additional course. They teach more courses in a day than any teacher in the district. This would help bring that into a little bit of alignment. We think that's good for your students, to have teachers who are more refreshed and engaged. We do have students who don't do well in the state assessment, and they're required to take what we call 14, 16 hours. There's a law that requires them to get remediation. They can lose an elective if they don't get that remediation done, depending on how many hours they need to get accomplished. This would really incentivize more of our students getting those remediation hours done in the summer. We think that's a good idea. The kids may not be wild about it. But let me tell you why we think that's a good idea. If a student's behind academically and they need remediation, they need it so that they are ready for the next grade level. That is far more advantageous to student learning than getting in the next grade level and trying to be remediated while learning new content at a higher level of rigor. And so we want students and families to realize that if a student is got some of those required remediation hours, that the best opportunity for them to do that is in the summer. It takes 2 weeks, we get them done, we get them remediated, and then they're ready to walk into 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade, depending on what grade we're talking about, ready to go and on a level playing field with their students who did well on the state exams. Students will be taking filler classes. This may or may not mean anything to you all, but I do hear occasionally from middle school parents about our kids are just taking classes to take them. They don't even really want to be in them, but they've got all these periods and they've got to fill them up. At the high school, kids can earn release periods, and so it's not as big a challenge. But at the middle school, they can't just drive off campus. And so we've heard some of that, so this is responsive to that. It is a more efficient use of staff, and it does create financial savings. And I'll show you how much here in a minute. But like I said earlier, we started thinking about this because we were looking for ways that we thought we might be able to pull back on our expenses. And this does allow us to save some money and put teachers in positions where they can do the most amount of good given on their certification. And then I'm going to talk to you here in a few minutes more about weighted funding for CTE. But that required professional communication class, it actually earns additional funding for the school district. Those kids are already taking that class, so doing this doesn't get the district more money, but it shifts where that money is coming in. Okay. So the con is that there is a loss of an elective in 7th grade. Again, I think I've explained how that could be advantageous when they get to high school. We need to reimagine that advisory time. I think we probably need to do that anyway, to be blunt. And then we're having to work with staff realignment. How do we put staff in place that they could be most successful with some of the changes that we're making? That's more of an us problem than a you problem. But someone can say, man, it's like, you sure you want to do this? We're going to have to realign the way we use some of our staff. Yes, we are. But ultimately, that's what we need to do to make sure that we are taking care of our students in our community and being likewise users of the investment of taxpayer dollars. All right, financial impact. This one shift could save the district up to $600,000. And y'all, that number's a little low. It's probably actually more than that. And we would probably phase this in. We're going to phase it in, so we may not get all those savings in year one. But there's about a $600,000 savings to the district on this change. And so it's enough money to where it's an important amount. To put $600,000 in perspective for you, that's about 10 teachers. That's about 0.5% of a pay raise for staff. Just give you, what does that number really mean? So it's no small amount. We're having to eliminate AVID. I don't know how to explain that any more simple than what I just said. It is one of the most expensive programs we run in the district. And part of what makes AVID so expensive is the program fee. There are actually fees associated. You see those membership dues and supplies? We spend about $110,000 a year just to be able to use the name AVID in the program. And then it also requires some travel. It requires some teacher dedication. They're very expensive programs. About twice as much of a per pupil cost as almost any other program we have. We have one other program that runs the district costs $1,000 per student, and we're working on that one as well. But AVID's no longer going to be an option at the middle school or the high school moving forward. And I got to tell you, that one, like you talk about changes and things, I was actually the high school principal here when we brought AVID to the district. It's kind of my idea to bring it here. But every idea has a shelf life, even good ones. And so this one's one that has kind of run its course. We've seen a decline in the number of students enrolling in AVID over the years. And it was going to be time for us to have to visit that topic eventually anyway. But we are eliminating AVID from our course selections. All right, everything I've talked about so far are things that we're trying to do to reduce expenses. There's also some things we can do to increase revenue. And I want to explain all those to you as well. And again, your students won't feel the impact of this in any meaningful way. But I want you to understand what's going on, really for two reasons. One, because you know, but two, I want you to realize that as we're thinking about these budget issues, we're trying to think as creatively and as broadly as we can about how to come at it. And so some of the changes in law have kind of created some challenges for us. Some changes in law have created some opportunities. And so one of the things that we're able to do is offer some CTE courses at the middle school that we haven't always been able to offer. We have been offering them using, so they call it, innovative course number. This is where it gets kind of technical. We've been doing certain things because Midway's Midway, and we want our kids to have opportunities. The state has now caught up and said, we think those are good ideas, and have now attached funding to the courses that we've basically already been offering. Are y'all tracking with me? Okay. So, for example, that professional communications, that speech class in health and wellness, for about the next 3 years, it'll generate an additional $174,000 a year for the district. Because we'll have 7th graders and high schoolers taking it at the same time for the next 3 years. So for 3 years, we'll get a little bit of an artificial bump there financially. Okay? We can take the 7th grade local credit for ag science orientation and change that to a high school principles of ag class. And based on current numbers, that would generate about $21,000 of additional revenue. So we already offer this class. We currently call it, it's a local credit called ag science orientation. It's the same class. We're just going to change the name of it to principles to ag and food and natural resources. We have to change the PIMS number, which means nothing to y'all. We have to change the code on the back end. And other than that, it is for all practical purposes the same class. Same thing with robotics. We offer a robotics class in middle school. We can flip that to high school robotics 1. We can offer it at the middle school level. And that's going to generate, based on current numbers, if those numbers were to hold, about $34,000. And every one of these classes that you see that we're flipping to for high school credit, these are all chances for kids to earn high school credit in middle school. And so that does a couple things for the kiddos. It allows them to take high school classes and get grades that don't count on their GPA. The reason I keep coming back to that, y'all, is, okay, I've raised a couple kids. I got one who just graduated from college and one sitting in college. And let me just tell you, they turned weird in middle school. Okay? And by the time they got to high school, they started returning back to the humans I thought they were when they were in elementary school. Kids make mistakes in middle school. They make mistakes behaviorally, and they make mistakes academically. And this gives them a chance to take some courses that will count toward high school credit. And if they stumble or make a mistake or struggle a little bit with going through the middle school process, they get that credit, but it doesn't hurt them on their GPA. And so then when they hit high school, they've already got some stuff under their belt that they haven't had to risk a low grade on necessarily. Okay? Same thing with PALS. We have a class right now that we call PALS. And if we'll change that to a class called Community Service, it'll generate at the middle school an additional $30,000 and at the high school about $46,000. Just by changing the way we code these and changing the way we title them in our course catalog. Most of these are very, very minor changes. Now on the PALS, they're going to have a little bit of curriculum they have to work through. They're not going to stop visiting the schools, but there's some teach pieces we have to do with that. That's a little different than we're doing right now. But again, it'll be barely noticeable to most of your students because we already work with these kids on these topics in a pretty deep way as it is. All in, that generates $305,000 for the next 3 years. $305,000 a year for the next 3 years. And so then if you take the additional revenue and you take the subtraction of expenses, the change financially for us is worth about $1.1 million. Again, to put that in perspective, it's about $60,000 a teacher. So you're 20-ish or so teachers, or about 1% worth of compensation increase for staff. Okay? And so those are big numbers that have a big impact on the way the district does business. And as we look at this, we think that it's kind of obvious the help that this can provide for our budget is minimal impact to students, and in many, many cases, it's going to actually benefit them in the long run. I'll be real blunt with y'all. There's some of the stuff that we're doing, it's like, man, we probably should have done this a couple of years ago. So we think we're just fortuitous to be in a position to do this much good with this minor interruption. So what are some of the key takeaways that I hope you get? Students are likely to benefit or be mostly unaffected by the things I'm discussing with you tonight. You're going to have to work through 7th grade, but once you get that figured out, you'll be in good shape. You'll lose one elective in grade 7, but you gain that elective right back when they get into high school. There's more opportunity to earn high school credit without risking GPA hits. There's more personalized intervention as needed for all learners. I want to circle back to that for just a minute. So I told you we're working on kind of reimagining this advisory. I've actually delegated the kind of creation of that to a person on my exec team named Paul Offill. He was the River Valley Middle School principal for several years. He was an assistant principal there for years, and even back when it was an intermediate. And he's actually the one who's kind of leading this up. And the reason I've asked him to do that is because he's going to work closely with Dr. Metzger, who's here tonight, and I didn't see Ms. Brown slip in, but I'm sorry?
Our child has an elementary program.
Oh, okay, she's being a mom tonight. But our two middle school principals, their counselors and their staffs, so that we build this up from with a student-centered perspective, where there are some things we have to cover. We're legally required to cover certain things. But we also want our principals to have a lot of autonomy, being flexible to meet the needs of learners. And I mean all learners. Mr. Awful and I were talking today about this specific topic. And what I told him was, I would love it if our kids who are our most advanced learners, some of our GT kids, some of our kids who are really, really bright and doing exceptional at school, to where when they go to their advisory time, that there are times, it wouldn't be every day, y'all, but there are times when they're doing nothing but working on some of the big challenges in life that are super engaging to kiddos. What if we challenge kids with trying to figure out how to deal with water insecurity across the world? And make that something they can work through as an enrichment activity, where they take what they're learning in their core classes and apply it to something that really matters. What if we got young people start to struggle with how we solve the problems of plastics in the ocean, advanced renewable energy? There's so many things that our kids really want to do. And if you do it in an advisory setting, it's not necessarily about a grade, but it's something that they can do that really energizes their mind and gets them excited about coming to school every day. And so we really want this to be designed in such a way where every child, no matter where they're on the learning spectrum, is being challenged and encouraged and hopefully really inspired to lean into the area of giftedness. So anyway, and then there'll be more to come as needed, y'all. This is a bit of an iterative process. I told you we're working on the advisory. There'll be more of that that's rolled out. But we wanted to take a moment and just share this information with you because we know that we come back from the Christmas break. We'll hit January and we'll start having conversations and sending communications to parents about schedule of course selection for middle schoolers going into the 26-27 school year. And so I want to have a chance to at least visit with you about this a little bit so that you weren't caught off guard. There's a chance that we could have done this and not even said anything, and you might not have even noticed because these changes are relatively mild. But I want to make sure that you knew what was going on with all of this. And you know, I'm going to be repetitive here, but this takes effect next school year. All right, so nothing changes for the spring. The courses are set and all that good stuff. And so, y'all, that's what I had to share with you tonight. I do appreciate you taking the time to come.